Welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe for the best Reddit creepypasta stories, perfect for bedtime chills. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the story. I've always been fascinated by ghost stories, but I never expected to be part of one. It all started at St. John's boarding school, an ancient institution with a reputation for strict discipline and academic excellence. The old buildings, with their creaky floors and drafty halls, gave the school a timeless, eerie feel. My friends and I often joked about it being haunted, but none of us truly believed it. Not until that fateful night in the library. It was a typical Friday evening. Most students were in the common room watching a movie, but my friends and I had decided to spend the night studying for an upcoming history exam. There were 5 of us: Alex, the class clown; Rachel, the quiet bookworm; Sam, the sports enthusiast; Mike, the tech genius; and me, the curious one. We were all sitting around a large wooden table, surrounded by towering bookshelves, when Rachel stumbled upon something unusual. "Hey, look at this," she said, pulling an old, dust-covered book from a shelf. "It looks like some kind of journal." Intrigued, we gathered around as Rachel opened the journal. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was barely legible. It belonged to a student named Emily, who attended St. John's over 50 years ago. As Rachel read aloud, we learned that Emily had been fascinated by the supernatural and had conducted various experiments to communicate with spirits. As we flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper fell out. Alex picked it up and unfolded it, revealing a Ouija board. It was a small, handmade board with letters and numbers scrawled across it in faded ink. "Guys, this is it. We have to try it," Alex said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. I was hesitant. "I don't know, Alex. This feels wrong." Emily's journal mentioned some pretty disturbing stuff, but Alex was insistent, and the others seemed curious. Reluctantly, I agreed. We moved the table to the center of the room and placed the Ouija board on it. Using an old glass as a planchette, we dimmed the lights and sat in a circle, our fingers lightly touching the glass. "Is there anyone here with us?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the glass began to move. At first, we thought it was Alex messing around, but his wide-eyed expression told us otherwise. The glass moved to yes. We exchanged nervous glances. "Who are you?" Rachel asked. The glass moved again, spelling out Emily. My heart raced. "Emily, are you the student who wrote the journal?" "Yes." "Why are you still here?" Sam asked, his voice trembling. Darkness. "What do you mean by darkness?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "RUN." Before we could ask more, the glass shot across the board, shattering against the wall. The room grew colder, and a sense of dread washed over us. Suddenly, the library door slammed shut, and the lights flickered. "We need to get out of here," Mike said, his voice shaking. We scrambled to our feet and rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as we pounded on the door, screaming for help. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the lights stabilized and the door creaked open. We bolted out of the library and back to our dorms, our hearts pounding in our chests. That night, none of us slept well. I kept hearing whispers and feeling cold drafts, even though my windows were closed. The next morning, we gathered in the common room, our faces pale and tired. "We need to find out what happened to Emily," Rachel said, "and what she meant by darkness." Despite our fear, we agreed. Over the next few days, we delved into the school's archives, searching for any information about Emily. What we found was chilling. Emily had been a brilliant student, but she had become obsessed with the supernatural. She believed there was a dark presence in the school, something evil lurking in the shadows. Her experiments with the Ouija board were her attempts to understand it and, if possible, banish it. But Emily never got the chance. One night, she disappeared without a trace. Her body was found weeks later in the old bell tower, Her face twisted in terror. The official cause of death was never determined, but the rumour was that she had been driven mad by the dark presence she was trying to fight. As we pieced together Emily's story, strange things started happening around us. We heard footsteps in empty hallways, saw shadows moving in the corners of our eyes, and felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It was clear that whatever had tormented Emily was now targeting us. We decided to confront it head on. We returned to the library one night armed with candles and the Ouija board. "We need to finish what Emily started," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. As we sat around the board, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Emily, are you here?" I asked. "Yes." "How can we stop the darkness?" Light. Light? What do you mean? Before Emily could answer, the candles flickered and a cold wind swept through the room. The shadows on the walls seemed to come alive, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. The temperature dropped further, and we could see our breath in the air. Suddenly, the glass on the board moved violently, spelling out DEMON. The room plunged into darkness, and we heard a low, guttural growl. Panic set in as we fumbled for the candles, but they wouldn't relight. The growling grew louder, and I felt something cold and slimy brush against my arm. "We need to leave, now!" Sam shouted. We grabbed the Ouija board and ran for the door, but it slammed shut again. The growling turned into a menacing laugh, and the shadows closed in around us. Just when I thought we were done for, the door burst open, and the lights flickered back on. We stumbled out of the library, gasping for breath. Whatever was haunting St. John's was not just a ghost. It was something far more sinister, and it wasn't going to let us go easily. As we regrouped in our dorms, we knew we had to find a way to banish the demon. But how? Emily had said light, but what did that mean? We were in over our heads, and the darkness was closing in. Our first encounter with the dark presence left us shaken but determined. We couldn't just leave things as they were. Emily had tried to warn us, and it was up to us to finish what she started. We decided to start by researching the school's history, hoping to find clues about the demon's origin and how to defeat it. The school's library was our primary resource, and we spent hours combing through old records, journals, and newspapers. We discovered that St. John's had a long history of mysterious deaths and disappearances, dating back to its founding in the late 1800s. There were stories of students going mad, teachers vanishing without a trace, and even rumours of occult rituals being performed in secret. One name kept coming up: Father Sebastian, the school's founder. According to the records, Father Sebastian was a charismatic but enigmatic figure. He was a devout Christian, but there were whispers that he dabbled in dark magic. Some claimed that he had summoned a demon to protect the school and ensure its success, but the ritual had gone horribly wrong, binding the demon to the grounds. As we delved deeper, we found an old book hidden in a dusty corner of the library. It was a grimoire, filled with ancient spells and rituals. One page, in particular, caught our attention. It detailed a ritual to banish a demon using a combination of light and sacred symbols. "Do you think this is what Emily meant by light?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "It has to be," Mike replied. "But we need to be careful. If we mess this up, we can make things worse." We gathered the necessary items for the ritual: candles, salt, holy water, and a mirror. The grimoire also mentioned that we would need a personal item from the demon's victim. After some debate, we decided to use Emily's journal, hoping it would suffice. The ritual needed to be performed at the stroke of midnight, in the place where the demon's power was strongest. We guessed that the bell tower, where Emily had been found, was the right spot. The climb up to the tower was nerve-wracking. The narrow, spiralling staircase seemed to stretch on forever, and the air grew colder with each step. Finally, we reached the top. The bell tower was a desolate place, with broken windows and a thick layer of dust covering the floor. We arranged the candles in a circle, sprinkled salt around the perimeter, and placed the mirror in the center. As the clock struck midnight, we began the ritual. Rachel read the incantation from the grimoire, her voice steady but filled with tension. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I held Emily's journal, feeling a strange connection to the girl who had died so tragically. Suddenly the room grew unbearably cold, and a low growl echoed through the tower. The shadows on the walls twisted and writhed, forming a monstrous shape. The demon had arrived. "We need to keep going," Mike shouted, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Rachel continued the incantation, her voice growing louder and more confident. The demon lunged at us, but it was stopped by the salt barrier. It roared in frustration, its eyes glowing with malevolent fury. "Hold the mirror up," Rachel commanded. I grabbed the mirror and held it high, directing the candlelight onto the demon. It screamed in agony as the light seared its shadowy form. The incantation reached its climax, and with a final desperate howl, the demon was sucked into the mirror. The room fell silent, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. We were exhausted but relieved. The demon was gone, and Emily's spirit could finally rest. Or so we thought. In the days following the ritual, things seemed to return to normal at St. John's Cess. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the strange occurrences stopped. We felt a sense of accomplishment, believing we had banished the demon for good. But then, strange things started happening again. It began with small incidents, objects moving on their own, cold drafts in warm rooms, and whispers in the dark. At first we dismissed them as our imaginations running wild, but the incidents grew more frequent and disturbing. One night, I woke up to find a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was Emily, her face twisted in terror. "You didn't finish it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The darkness is still here." I bolted upright, but the figure was gone. The encounter left me shaken, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that we had missed something crucial in the ritual. We reconvened the next day, sharing our experiences. It was clear that the demon had not been fully banished. We needed to find out what went wrong and how to fix it. Returning to the grimoire, we discovered a section we had overlooked. It mentioned that the ritual needed to be sealed with a final act of purification. We had missed the last step. Using the mirror to reflect the light of the dawn, symbolizing a new beginning and the end of the demon's power, we decided to complete the ritual the following morning. We returned to the bell tower at dawn, our nerves on edge. The air was thick with anticipation as we set up the candles and mirror once again. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the broken windows, I held the mirror up, reflecting the light onto the spot where the demon had appeared. We chanted the final incantation, our voices steady despite the fear gnawing at us. The light grew brighter, filling the tower with a warm golden glow. For a moment, I felt a sense of peace, as if we had finally done it. But then, the shadows in the room began to shift and converge, forming a dark, menacing shape. The demon had returned, and it was furious. The room grew colder, and the shadows lashed out at us. We struggled to keep the mirror steady, our breaths forming clouds in the frigid air. "Keep going!" Rachel shouted, her voice breaking with fear. We chanted louder, the light from the mirror growing more intense. The demon roared in pain, its form flickering and distorting. Just as it seemed the light would prevail, the mirror cracked, sending shards of glass flying through the air. The light dimmed, and the shadows closed in around us. We were thrown to the ground, the air knocked out of our lungs. As I lay there, gasping for breath, I felt a cold, slimy hand wrap around my ankle, dragging me toward the darkness. I struggled to break free, but the grip was too strong. Just when I thought I would be pulled into the abyss, a blinding light filled the room. The demon screeched in agony, releasing its hold on me. I looked up to see Father Sebastian standing in the doorway, holding a large, ornate crucifix. "Begone, foul creature!" he shouted, his voice filled with authority. The demon recoiled, its form dissolving into wisps of smoke. The light from the crucifix intensified, filling the room with a purifying glow. With one final scream, the demon was banished, leaving behind an eerie silence. Father Sebastian lowered the crucifix and approached us. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now. We nodded, too exhausted to speak. He helped us to our feet and led us out of the bell tower, the dawn light warming our chilled bodies. In the aftermath of the final confrontation, Father Sebastian explained everything. He had been aware of the demon's presence since he founded the school. He had tried to banish it himself but had failed, leading to his own disappearance. He had been trapped in a liminal space, watching over the school and waiting for the right moment to intervene. "You were brave to take on the demon," he said, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "But the darkness runs deeper than you know." He revealed that the demon had been summoned by an ancient cult that once operated within the school. The cult had performed dark rituals to harness the demon's power, but their greed and arrogance had led to their downfall. The demon had turned on them, killing its summoners and binding itself to the school. Emily discovered the truth and tried to stop it, but she was too young and inexperienced, Father Sebastian explained. She died trying to save others. We listened in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. The demon's power had been weakened, but it was not gone. The final act of purification was not enough to banish it completely. We needed to find and destroy the cult's artifacts to break its hold on the school. Over the next few weeks, we worked with Father Sebastian to uncover the cult's secrets. We explored hidden passages, deciphered ancient texts, and unearthed relics buried deep within the school's foundations. Each artifact we destroyed weakened the demon's power, but it fought back with every step. The more we uncovered, the more we realized the true extent of the cult's influence. They had embedded their dark magic into the very fabric of the school, corrupting everything it touched. The shadows grew darker, the whispers louder, and the sense of dread more pervasive. One night, as we prepared to destroy the final artifact, the demon launched a desperate attack. It summoned all its remaining strength, lashing out with fury and desperation. The walls of the school shook, and the air grew thick with malevolence. We gathered in the chapel, the one place where the demon's power was weakest. Father Sebastian led the ritual, his voice strong and unwavering. We chanted along with him, our voices blending into a harmonious chorus. As the final incantation echoed through the chapel, the demon appeared, its form more terrifying than ever. It lunged at us, but we stood our ground, holding the crucifix high. The light from the crucifix filled the room, banishing the darkness and burning the demon's shadowy form. With a final, ear-piercing scream, the demon was vanquished, the relic shattered, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The school was finally free from the darkness that had plagued it for so long. In the weeks that followed, St. John's boarding school began to heal. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the sense of dread dissipated. The shadows no longer whispered, and the cold drafts were replaced by a warm, welcoming ambience. Father Sebastian, freed from his liminal prison, became the school's guardian, ensuring that the dark presence would never return. He helped us repair the damage done by the demon and guided us in creating a safe and nurturing environment for future students. We continued our studies, but our bond had deepened. The ordeal had changed us, forging a friendship that would last a lifetime. We had faced unimaginable horrors together and emerged stronger for it. As graduation approached, we reflected on our journey. The school, once a place of fear and darkness, had become a symbol of resilience and hope. We had uncovered its secrets, faced its demons, and emerged victorious. On our final night at St. John's, we gathered in the library, the place where it had all begun. The room, once filled with shadows and fear, was now a place of light and warmth. We sat around the table, reminiscing about our adventures and the lessons we had learned. "We did it," Alex said, his voice filled with pride. "We saved the school. We couldn't have done it without each other," Rachel added, her eyes shining with gratitude. As we prepared to leave St. John West, we knew we were leaving behind more than just a school. We were leaving behind a legacy of courage, friendship, and hope. The darkness had been banished, but the light we had brought would continue to shine. We stepped out into the dawn, the first rays of sunlight casting a golden glow on the school. As we walked away, We knew that St. John's was no longer haunted by the past. It was a place of new beginnings, where the light would always prevail over the darkness. And so, our story came to an end, not with fear and despair, but with hope and renewal. We had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, forever changed, but stronger for it. The haunted school was haunted no more, and its legacy would live on in the hearts of those who had fought to save it. The events I'm about to share changed my life forever, and they all started with a seemingly innocent Ouija board. It was a cold, dreary Friday night when my friends and I decided to mess around with the Ouija board. We were in my basement, surrounded by the familiar comforts of my childhood home. The basement was dimly lit, the shadows from the flickering candles dancing on the walls, the musty smell of old furniture, and the faint hum of the heating system provided an eerie backdrop to our session. "Let's ask it something creepy," suggested Mark, the ringleader of our group. He was always the one pushing boundaries, eager to experience a thrill. We sat in a circle, the Ouija board in the centre. Our fingers lightly touched the planchette, and we began to move it in slow, deliberate circles. "Is there anyone here with us?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. At first, nothing happened. We exchanged nervous glances, giggling at our own gullibility. But then, the planchette started to move. Slowly, it slid towards yes. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. The planchette moved again, spelling out the letters one by one. GRANDMA. My heart skipped a beat. My grandma had passed away 3 years ago, in a small cabin deep in the woods. She had been sick for a long time, but her death had been sudden and unexpected. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to brush it off as coincidence. "That's not funny, guys," I said, looking around at my friends. They all seemed genuinely surprised, which only made me more uneasy. Mark, always the skeptic, pressed on. "What do you want?" VISIT. "Visit where?" I asked, my voice barely audible. CABIN. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The cabin was the last place I wanted to go. It was a place filled with painful memories and a lingering sense of dread. But the board had spoken, and I felt a strange compulsion to follow its instructions. The next day, I packed my bags and headed out to the cabin. It was a long drive, the road winding through dense forests and desolate landscapes. As I got closer, the trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab me. When I finally arrived, the cabin looked exactly as I remembered it. The wooden structure was weathered and worn, the windows covered in a thin layer of grime. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I stepped out of the car. This place had once been a sanctuary, a place of warmth and love. Now it felt like a tomb. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was deafening. I made my way through the small rooms, each one filled with memories of my grandma, her favourite chair, the old quilt she had made, the bookshelf filled with her beloved novels. Everything was just as she had left it. I decided to stay the night, hoping to find some closure. As the sun set and darkness enveloped the cabin, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. I lit a few candles and settled into the old rocking chair by the fireplace. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around midnight, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the voice grew louder and more insistent. "Come to me," it said, echoing through the cabin. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My heart raced as I followed the voice, my footsteps echoing in the silence. It led me to the bedroom, the place where my grandma had spent her final days. The door creaked open, and I felt a rush of cold air. Inside, the room was filled with a strange, otherworldly light. I saw a figure standing by the bed, its features obscured by the shadows. As I stepped closer, I realized it was my grandma. Her eyes were hollow, and her skin was pale and translucent. "Grandma?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't respond. Instead, she pointed to the bed. I looked down and saw a Ouija board, identical to the one we had used in the basement. The planchette was moving on its own, spelling out a message. DONTLEAVE. I felt a surge of panic. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that cabin as possible, but something held me in place. I could feel my grandma's presence, her sadness and desperation. "Why?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. The planchette moved again, spelling out the answer. TRAPPED. I realized then that my grandma's spirit was trapped in that cabin, bound by some dark force. The Ouija board had led me here, but now it was up to me to set her free. As the night wore on, the cabin seemed to come alive with a malevolent energy. I could hear whispers and footsteps, see shadows moving in the corners of my vision. My grandma's ghostly figure remained by the bed, her eyes pleading with me to help her. I knew I couldn't leave. Not until I found a way to break the curse that bound her spirit to this place. But as the darkness closed in around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister was at play. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained and disoriented. The events of the previous night felt like a nightmare, but the Ouija board on the bed was a stark reminder that it had all been real. I knew I had to find a way to help my grandma, but I had no idea where to start. I spent the day searching the cabin, looking for any clues or signs that might explain the curse. I went through her old books, her letters, and her personal belongings. There were no clear answers, but I did find a journal hidden in the back of her closet. It was old and worn, the pages yellowed with age. As I flipped through the journal, I found entries detailing my grandma's life at the cabin. She wrote about her love for the place, her joy at being surrounded by nature, and her pride in maintaining the property. But as I read further, the entries took a darker turn. She wrote about strange occurrences, voices in the night, shadows that moved on their own, and a feeling of being watched. She mentioned the Ouija board and how she'd used it to try to communicate with my grandpa after he passed away. She described how the board had initially seemed harmless, but then things started to go wrong. Her entries grew more frantic and desperate. She wrote about being trapped in the cabin, unable to leave. She mentioned a dark presence, something that had latched onto her and refused to let go. Her final entry was a plea for help, begging anyone who found the journal to set her free. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the gravity of the situation. My grandma's spirit was trapped, and the Ouija board was the key to her imprisonment. I had to find a way to break the curse and release her soul. That night, I decided to try using the Ouija board again. I lit candles and set up the board in the bedroom, hoping to make contact with my grandma. As I placed my fingers on the planchette, I felt a surge of energy, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Grandma, are you here?" I asked, my voice shaking. The planchette moved to yes. "How can I help you?" I asked, my heart pounding. TRAPPED, it spelled out again. "How can I set you free?" The planchette moved slowly, spelling out a series of letters that made no sense to me. BLOOD, SACRIFICE, and BOND. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized what it was asking for. The curse could only be broken through a blood sacrifice. Something that would bind me to the cabin in my grandma's place. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sacrifice myself to save her, but I also couldn't leave her trapped in that cabin forever. I felt torn, desperate, and alone. As the night wore on, the shadows grew darker and the whispers grew louder. I knew I had to make a decision, but I didn't know what to do. The next morning, I decided to leave the cabin and seek help. I drove back to town, my mind racing with thoughts of curses and sacrifices. I visited the local library and searched for any information on breaking curses and dealing with spirits. I spoke to anyone who would listen, but most people dismissed me as crazy. As the days passed, I felt the cabin's pull growing stronger. I knew I couldn't stay away for long. I had to go back, face the darkness and find a way to set my grandma free, but I was terrified of what I might have to do to achieve that. A week after my initial visit, I returned to the cabin. This time, I was armed with more knowledge and a renewed sense of determination. I'd found a local historian who specialised in folklore and the supernatural. He had given me some advice on how to break the curse, but it came with a heavy price. The historian, an old man named Mr. Thompson, had listened to my story with a grave expression. He told me about the dark history of the land where the cabin was built. According to him, the area was once home to a cult that practiced dark rituals and sacrifices. The cabin, he said, was built on a site of great spiritual significance, and the curse was a result of those ancient rituals. To break the curse, I would need to perform a ritual of my own. It involved blood, as the Ouija board had indicated, but it wasn't a simple sacrifice. I had to spill my own blood to bind myself to the cabin temporarily, and then find a way to sever that bond without losing my life. Mr. Thompson warned me that the ritual was dangerous and that I needed to be prepared for anything. He gave me a small vial of holy water and a book of incantations, both of which he said would help protect me from the dark forces at play. When I arrived at the cabin, the atmosphere was even more oppressive than before. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. I set up the Ouija board and began the ritual as instructed. I cut my palm with a knife, letting the blood drip onto the board. The planchette moved on its own, spelling out words that sent chills down my spine. BLOOD, SACRIFICE, BOND. As I recited the incantations from the book, the room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I felt a presence in the room, a dark force that seemed to be watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I heard a low, guttural growl and felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I screamed, swinging the knife wildly, but there was nothing there. The growling grew louder, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. I struggled to breathe, my vision blurring as the darkness closed in. I knew I was on the verge of passing out, but I couldn't stop the ritual. I had to finish it, or I would be trapped in the cabin forever. With the last of my strength, I poured the holy water over the Ouija board and recited the final incantation. There was a blinding flash of light, and the dark presence vanished. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. When I came to, the room was filled with a strange, peaceful light. I looked up and saw my grandma standing over me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a gentle breeze. "You've set me free." I felt a wave of relief wash over me as her spirit began to fade. The cabin felt lighter, the oppressive darkness lifted. I knew I had done the right thing, but the ordeal had left me shaken and exhausted. In the days following the ritual, I tried to return to normal life, but the experience had left a lasting impact on me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and the memories of the dark presence in the cabin haunted my dreams. I visited Mr. Thompson again, seeking reassurance and guidance. He told me that breaking the curse had come at a cost, and that I might still be connected to the dark forces that had bound my grandma's spirit. He gave me a protective charm and advised me to keep it with me at all times. Despite his reassurances, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was still wrong. The cabin, though no longer haunted, seemed to call out to me, and I felt an overwhelming urge to return. I knew it was dangerous, but I couldn't resist the pull. I decided to go back one last time, hoping to find closure. As I approached the cabin, I felt a sense of dread, but also a strange sense of peace. The air was still, the forest silent. I stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards echoing in the empty space. I made my way to the bedroom where I had performed the ritual. The Ouija board was gone, replaced by a simple wooden cross. I felt a sense of relief, knowing that my grandma's spirit was finally at peace. But as I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper. "Thank you," it said, echoing through the cabin. I felt a chill run down my spine, but also a sense of closure. I knew that my grandma was watching over me, and that I had done the right thing. I left the cabin for the last time, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The dark presence was gone, and my grandma's spirit was free. But the experience had changed me, and I knew that I would never be the same. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. I moved to a new town, started a new job, and tried to put the events of the cabin behind me. But the memories lingered, and I found myself drawn to stories of the supernatural and the occult. I began to research other haunted locations and cursed objects, hoping to understand more about the forces that had bound my grandma's spirit. I visited old libraries, spoke to historians and paranormal investigators, and even joined a local ghost hunting group. Through my research, I learned that the dark presence in the cabin was not unique. There were countless stories of spirits trapped by curses, bound to places and objects by dark forces. I realized that my experience was just one of many, and that there were others out there who needed help. I made it my mission to help those spirits find peace. Armed with the knowledge and experience gained from my own ordeal, I traveled to haunted locations, performed rituals, and worked to break curses. It was dangerous and exhausting work, but I felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I'd never known before. The experience at the cabin had changed me, but it had also given me a new sense of direction. I knew that I could never go back to my old life, but I was determined to make the most of my new one. I would help those who were trapped, just as I had helped my grandma, and I would do whatever it took to bring peace to the restless spirits of the world. And so, I moved forward, haunted by the past, but driven by a new purpose. The cabin was behind me, but the lessons I had learned and the experiences I had endured would stay with me forever. I was no longer just a skeptic or a thrill seeker. I was a guardian, a protector, and a seeker of truth in a world filled with shadows and secrets. I hope you enjoyed reading my story. It's been a long and difficult journey, but sharing it with others has brought me some measure of peace. If you ever find yourself drawn to the supernatural, remember to be careful. The forces at play are powerful and dangerous, and they can change your life in ways you can never imagine. So it started with my friend Mike. He'd always been into the occult, collecting old books on witchcraft and ancient rituals. When he brought up the idea of using a Ouija board to contact a spirit, it seemed like just another one of his weird hobbies, a way to kill a Friday night. "Guys, I've got something special planned for tonight," Mike announced, with a gleam in his eye. "Ever heard of Robert Sloan?" We all had. Robert Sloan, the notorious serial killer executed in the 1980s for a string of brutal murders. His name was synonymous with terror in our small town. They said he had a fascination with the occult, and rumours had it that he tried to summon dark forces from beyond the grave, even in his final moments. "Yeah, what about him?" I asked, rolling my eyes. "We're going to contact his spirit," Mike said, pulling out an old wooden Ouija board from his backpack. It looked ancient, the letters and numbers faded from years of use. "You're kidding, right?" Sarah laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Nope, I found this board at an antique shop. The owner said it was used by Sloan himself," Mike replied, setting the board down on the coffee table in his dimly lit basement. I exchanged uneasy glances with Sarah and Jake, our other friend. It sounded like bullshit, but there was something about the way Mike spoke that made me shiver. "Come on, it'll be fun. What's the worst that could happen?" Mike said, sensing our hesitation. Reluctantly, we all agreed. We sat around the table, placing our fingers lightly on the planchette. Mike began to chant softly, invoking Sloan's name, asking him to join us. At first, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the creak of the old house settling and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Then, the planchette began to move. I thought Mike was pushing it, trying to scare us, but the look of concentration and fear on his face made me doubt that. The planchette moved slowly at first, spelling out simple words: yes, no, hello. Then it started spelling out longer messages. WWHOCALLSME, it spelled. "Who calls me?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "It's us, Robert Sloan. We want to speak to you," Mike said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. The planchette moved again, faster this time. "WHYSHOULDITRUSTYOU? Why should I trust you?" Jake read aloud, his face pale. "We mean you no harm. We just want to know about your power," Mike replied. There was a long pause, the air thick with anticipation. Then, the planchette moved once more. "PROVEYOURLOYALTY. "Prove your loyalty," I said, my heart pounding. "How?" Mike asked. But the planchette was already spelling out instructions. It told us to gather certain items: a black candle, a piece of bloodstone, a lock of hair from each of us, and to meet again at midnight. As we scrambled to collect the items, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. This was no longer a game. We were treading in dangerous waters, and there was no turning back. Midnight came, and we gathered once more in Mike's basement. The atmosphere was heavy with a sense of foreboding. We lit the black candle, placed the bloodstone in the center of the board, and laid our locks of hair beside it. "Now what?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The planchette moved again, faster and more forceful than before. It spelled out a series of words that chilled me to the bone. KNEELANDRECITETHEOATH. We knelt around the table, feeling foolish but terrified of disobeying. Mike led the chant, his voice trembling as he recited the oath the board had spelled out. "By the blood of the living and the will of the dead, we call upon you, Robert Sloan. Grant us your power, and we will serve you faithfully." As we finished the chant, the candle flickered violently, and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. I could see my breath, and a chill ran down my spine. The planchette moved one last time, spelling out a final message. THERITUALHASBEGUN. The lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. I heard Sarah scream, and in the dim glow of the candle, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadowy figure was standing in the corner of the room, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. It was Robert Sloan. The figure in the corner moved closer, its presence filling the room with an oppressive darkness. We all froze, paralyzed by fear as Sloan's spirit seemed to solidify before our eyes. He looked exactly like the photographs we'd seen, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Who dares summon me?" Sloan's voice was a low, guttural growl reverberating through the room. We did," Mike stammered, his bravado crumbling in the face of this unearthly horror. "Do you seek power?" Sloan asked, his eyes narrowing as he looked at each of us. "Yes," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then you must complete the ritual," Sloan said, his smile widening. "Do as I say, and you will be rewarded." He gave us a list of instructions, each more disturbing than the last. We were to go to the old cemetery on the outskirts of town, dig up a specific grave, and bring back what we found there. It sounded insane, but we were too terrified to refuse. As we left Mike's house and headed towards the cemetery, the reality of what we were doing began to sink in. This was no longer a game. We were meddling with forces beyond our understanding, and there was no way to predict the consequences. The cemetery was shrouded in darkness, the moon hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. We found the grave Sloan had described, a weathered tombstone with his name etched into the stone. Our hearts pounded as we began to dig, the sound of shovels cutting through the earth, the only noise in the still night. After what felt like hours, our shovels struck something solid. We cleared away the remaining dirt to reveal a coffin, its wood rotting and decayed. With trembling hands, Mike pried it open, and we recoiled at the sight within. It was Sloan's corpse, perfectly preserved despite the years. His eyes were closed, and his hands were clasped around a small, leather-bound book. We took the book and hurried back to Mike's basement, our minds racing with fear and anticipation. Back in the basement, we opened the book, its pages filled with strange symbols and incantations. Sloan's spirit reappeared, hovering over the Ouija board, his eyes gleaming with dark intent. "Read the incantation aloud," he commanded, and Mike obeyed, his voice trembling as he spoke the ancient words. As the incantation was recited, the room began to shake, and a cold wind swept through the basement. The candle flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. We heard Sloan's laughter, a chilling sound that echoed in the blackness. Suddenly, the shaking stopped, and the lights flickered back on. The basement was empty, the Ouija board and the book lying on the table. Sloan's spirit was gone, but the sense of dread lingered. "What have we done?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We've started something we can't stop," Mike replied, his face pale. "We need to finish the ritual." The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. Strange things began to happen. Shadows moving in the corners of our vision, whispers in the night, and a constant feeling of being watched. It was as if Sloan's spirit was everywhere, lurking just out of sight. Mike became obsessed with the book, spending hours deciphering its cryptic symbols and incantations. He insisted that we had to complete the ritual to stop the haunting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making things worse. One night, as we gathered in Mike's basement once more, he revealed what he had discovered. The final part of the ritual involved a sacrifice, a life for a life. Sloan's spirit needed a body to return to the physical world, and we were the ones who had to provide it. "We can't do this," I said, horrified by the implication. "We can't kill someone." "We don't have a choice," Mike replied, his eyes wild. "If we don't, Sloan will never leave us alone." "Maybe we should just go to the police," Sarah suggested, but Mike shook his head. "They won't believe us, and even if they did, what could they do against a spirit?" We argued late into the night, but in the end, fear won out. We agreed to go through with the ritual, each of us too terrified of the alternative. The next night, we drove out to the cemetery once more, our hearts heavy with dread. We brought the necessary items, the book, the black candle, and a knife, and prepared to perform the final part of the ritual. As we stood around Sloan's grave, Mike began to chant the incantation, his voice shaking. The wind picked up, and the temperature dropped, a sure sign that Sloan's spirit was near. "We offer this life as a sacrifice," Mike said, raising the knife. "May it grant you the power to return." Before we could react, Mike plunged the knife into his own chest, his eyes wide with pain and determination. Blood poured from the wound, soaking the ground as he fell to his knees. "Mike, no!" Sarah screamed, but it was too late. Mike collapsed, his lifeless eyes staring up at us. As his blood seeped into the ground, the wind howled and a figure began to rise from the grave. It was Sloan, his form solidifying before our eyes. He looked at us with a cruel smile, his eyes gleaming with dark power. "Thank you," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "Your sacrifice has granted me new life." We stood frozen in horror as Sloan stepped out of the grave, his presence filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. He was free, and there was nothing we could do to stop him. In the days that followed, the true horror of what we had done began to unfold. Sloan's presence was everywhere, his malevolent spirit seeping into every corner of our lives. We were haunted by visions of his twisted smile, his cruel laughter echoing in our ears. Sarah was the first to succumb. She began to see Sloan's face in every reflection, his eyes following her wherever she went. She stopped sleeping, afraid of what she might see in her dreams. One night, she simply disappeared, leaving behind a cryptic note that read, "He's coming for us." Jake was next. He became paranoid, convinced that Sloan was lurking in every shadow. He barricaded himself in his house, refusing to leave, but it didn't help. One morning, I found his body hanging from the ceiling, a look of sheer terror etched on his face. I was the last one left, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Sloan came for me. The haunting grew worse, the shadows closing in, the whispers growing louder. I could feel Sloane's presence, always just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Desperation drove me back to Mike's basement, searching for anything that could help me undo the ritual, but it was too late. The book was gone, and the Ouija board lay shattered on the floor. I felt a cold breath on my neck and turned to see Sloan standing there, his eyes filled with malice. "It's over," he said, his voice a whisper of pure evil. "Your friends are gone, and now it's your turn." I tried to run, but there was no escape. Sloan was everywhere, his presence inescapable. He caught me, his grip like iron, and dragged me back to the cemetery. As he began the final part of the ritual, I knew there was no hope. We had unleashed a monster, and now we were paying the price. As the darkness closed in, I could hear Sloane's laughter, a chilling reminder of the horror we had brought upon ourselves. I woke up in the cemetery, the cold earth beneath me. I was alone, the night silent except for the distant hum of the city. Sloan was gone, his spirit having completed its grisly task. But the terror he had wrought remained, an ever-present reminder of our foolishness. I went to the police, but they didn't believe me. How could they? It sounded insane, the ramblings of a broken mind. They dismissed my story as the result of a shared delusion, a tragic consequence of dabbling in the occult. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move on, but the memories haunted me, the faces of my friends, the twisted smile of Sloan. They were always there, just beneath the surface of my thoughts. I couldn't escape the feeling that he was still watching, waiting for the right moment to return. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a familiar whisper. "It's not over," the voice said, and I knew that the nightmare was far from finished. Sloane's spirit was still out there, waiting for the chance to reclaim the power he had lost. And so, I live in constant fear, haunted by the knowledge that we had unleashed something truly evil. The ritual may have ended, but its consequences would last a lifetime. And as the darkness closes in each night, I wonder if Sloan will ever truly be gone, or if he will return to claim his final revenge.